Nalaya Chakana, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. Thank you so much for taking part in this interview today. I'm very happy to have you here. And for those who are unfamiliar with what you do, could you introduce yourself and tell us what you do exactly?
Yeah, sure. So the focus of my work is very specific. It's to help women who, let's say, in one way or another, identify with being strong or independent.
Mhm.
I see them as women who usually would have it all except love. So the thing that fascinates me most is the patterns in love and how we get stuck in certain patterns that don't actually serve what it is that we truly long for. And so I help these women attract their life partner. And I do this by integrating shamanic practices as well as tantric practices. And so it's almost like a division, right, between diving deep into the darkness to be able to enter the light and have the space to open up to new vision and magnetize. But I guess, for the details of like how, what, if, and when, and what my journey has been, I think the rest of that will be part of this interview. But yeah, the essence is really that, no, like how can we, in a tangible, easy way, break patterns, to attract a soulmate.
So, what do you think is the reason why these high performing women have this block? Do you think it's something to do with maybe the masculine and feminine energy or something like that? They're more maybe in the masculine space in their lives, and they have trouble embracing that feminine side. Do you think that could be an element, or is there anything that you can see that's a common feature?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I used to do this work for men and women both.
Mhm.
In the far, far past, like more than 10 years ago, I only worked with women. And now that I'm a mother, I'm in a long-term relationship. I mean, I'm married. I guess my own journey or like the initiations has allowed me to see certain shadows that are so very specific to this archetype. And I suppose that's why it's interesting for me to share it with a group of women of that kind, because I do believe that our stories often will overlap where we're able to recognize something in each other through our stories. So the storytelling is very much part of how I work, like the sharing of authenticity and vulnerabilities, and also allowing the other to weave their wisdom and their experiences into the web of how we move together in a group situation. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, for sure, I feel like, for example, as entrepreneurs, we need to be in that masculine energy, right? Like, otherwise, there's no way we can be successful. And what is interesting to discover is to see, like, okay, for example, no, like right now I'm doing a little bit of work, like I'm offering this course, but
Mhm.
for the last year and a half, I've only been a mother. And I suppose that space of not having worked at all has also allowed me to integrate certain aspects and see certain aspects. And upon reflection, I would say, like, yeah, the being the intimacy life coach that I was full time was also something that was leaking into friendships, for example, and it bothered me actually.
Oh, really? Well,
Like,
that sounds juicy. Is leaking into friendships in what sense?
well, that, of course, I'm fascinated by love stories. I love helping friends out with struggles in love or intimacy, partnership, sexuality, whatever is going on. Of course, I have a love for that. So it's naturally part of what comes up in conversation. But if I somehow in many relationships start ending up in that role, and that is the base of our friendship, then I think that that is something to look at, right? Like for those listening, perhaps you're also a coach of some kind or a therapist, or you have a role in taking the lead. And if you are in a process where you need to be vulnerable, you need to be held, you need guidance, and it's not directly available or not available in the way that you need it or want it, then there's a huge imbalance, right? So if women in that position who always take the lead, who are always there to help others, but then are confronted with not receiving that, and yet dream of having their life partner by their side, it's like, okay, maybe let's check into all these other layers of relationship first, to see like how we can balance that energy and create more of a wholesome, coherent way of relating in general before looking at who's this dream partner and where do you need to be in order to integrate that. So yeah, the masculine energy, I would definitely say if it's too big, it will leak into other relationships, relational forums. And if it's so big, it won't give space for a really masculine man to step into the field. So often, the complaint that I see in women as such is that, of course, they have beautiful relationships here and there, but the man is not masculine enough.
Okay.
And it's a balance, right? It's like, okay, she can make space for, being more in her feminine. But of course, the man who appears will have to step up in a way to ensure that she has the safety to be in her feminine, because it's a very different kind of vulnerability.
Definitely. And any other common shadows that you find in this archetype of women?
Yeah. Well, it's all kind of overlapping. The first thing that came to mind is, you know, she's the type of person who can take care of it all. So whenever there's a problem, whenever there's a process, whenever there's anything going on, and it's in the finer details. Like for example, I'll give a bit of my story to help clarify this attribute. So during the pandemic, I actually left everything behind. I was living in Peru, where I am now, actually. I was living here for 5 years. I was, I was really rooted. I thought the rest of my life was going to be here. During the pandemic, Ruwan and I reconnected because we'd actually met here once. It was nothing romantic, but we'd always had an attraction. So we broke the ice during the pandemic. He was in Thailand. I was here. It was world lockdown. It was hard to travel. I had to repatriate to Holland, where I'm from. And we had to figure out a way for me to be able to even enter Thailand to see whether this was something real. I mean, it's interesting for me to use those words because we both really felt strongly like this is not an illusion, because I'd fallen in love before with men who were elsewhere. And I had actually promised myself to not ever do that again, because very often, we create an illusion of what is the possibility or what is the potential without actually having this tangible experience. So I'd kind of, decided with myself, like, I'm just not going to do that. If the universe wants me to meet him, he'll arrive here in the present moment, in the place where I'm at. So I've never been on dating apps, for example, but for Ruwan, it was a whole different sensation, I suppose, that I had in my body. Him and I had a professional connection. So he's also, let's say, an intimacy life coach, but focused more on masculinity. And we had helped each other out throughout the years with various clients. I often referred his podcast to my clients. When I started working more with men, it was just like the person I reached out to. So we had this like respectful professional connection that had nothing to do with knowing each other personally. So there was already a bit of an understanding. And when I made that choice to leave everything behind and go to Thailand during the pandemic, so it wasn't like I could go back easily.
Mm-hmm.
I felt in my bones like, yeah, I knew this was it. And when I arrived, everything clicked, everything unfolded really beautifully. And I actually got pregnant very quickly, like after 5 months. We were already talking about parenthood. So the fact that it happened so quickly was very welcome. However, it forced me very strongly into my feminine, because I mean, there's lots of people, lots of women who will continue working when pregnant. But for certain women who are very sensitive, I would say that's not really possible, because there's an altered state of consciousness that happens. There's a lack of being able to direct or be connected to time and space. It's hard for me to put into words, but even, for example, working with clients one-on-one, it was too impactful. So the pregnancy opened the space for femininity, but also I was in a country where I knew nobody, I knew nothing, and I really had to lean on him for almost everything. And let's say the polarity that we then created was almost in its extremity, right? Like almost in its most divine primal form of him really being the man and me really being the woman. It was quite confronting because, like, as an entrepreneur, I'd always taken care of myself. I'd always been financially abundant. I stopped working. I went inward.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I didn't have my community around me. So I really had to lean on him. And the way that we navigated life was very much from that standpoint. And it helped me see certain things with more clarity that had been there in other relationships, let's say in more subtle ways. Because of course in other relationships I've also very much tried, like, okay, how can I be more in my feminine so that it emphasizes on his masculinity. But I think that very often certain ways of being are so engraved that it's hard to break them. And I honestly dare to say that I do believe that the inability for the woman to be in her feminine is very often the cause for relationships to not work out. And we can kind of come up with narratives of why this person was XYZ, or, you know, and I feel like these stories actually keep us trapped in repeating those patterns, in dating people that are just not it. And there's this addictive nature almost to, like, you know, learning from relationships, and the learning aspect being at the center of why you choose to be in that relationship, as opposed to cutting the bullshit and stop fucking around and making that commitment to yourself and say, okay, let's really do this differently this time, and allow yourself to be confronted with certain shadows and vulnerabilities, because there's no other way than a part of the identity to need to be crushed and destroyed completely when you do meet your soulmate.
So speaking of soulmates, what is a soulmate? How do you define a soulmate?
I would love for you to also answer that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I think, and
Let's
then I'll tell you what I think.
let
I mean, I am. It's a kind of question that's very provocative, I suppose. I just went to see Jay Shetty last week, and I interviewed this couple who've written this book, Wild Monogamy, just last week. So and I also am part of this sex book club, and we reviewed this book called Honest Sex this week, which is all very beautiful themes about intimacy and love. So it's a topic that's kind of feeding me in general right now. But I think of soulmate. It's something that sounds like a romantic notion. I'm not sure if there's just one, or if it's a different type of connection compared to what you've had before. I mean, something that's kind of a new sensation for me is about healing in intimacy, whereas I've had in the past relationships that have caused more trauma and added to the trauma of childhood, etc., and then created my own barriers that are maybe stopping this from coming to me. So it's something I find very provocative at this moment of my life, and I'm very intrigued by the concept. So it's very aligned with what I'm living right now to speak to you today. So would you like to share what you think a soulmate is?
Yeah. Well, the book clip sounds amazing.
It's really
Very
cool.
inspiring. Yeah. I'd love, maybe after the show you can share with me some titles. It sounds really awesome. Soulmate, I have to be honest, I often get turned off by certain terms, especially like twin flame and this and that, which, you know, again, maybe will activate some how do you call it? What's the word? Brainwashing that we receive through
Okay.
Disney movies, you know, where there's Prince Charming and the one. And so I do think that these terms are tricky to use. I suppose in a way, I mean, I personally do believe in true love, and I do believe in soulmate. And I suppose what it feels like to me is like almost this amazement of like, I cannot believe how well we click into each other, and how well we are able to navigate especially difficulty in life. And so what is a soulmate? I suppose it's meeting in the right moment of time where things align. So what I mean by that is, of course, there's always things to uncover or to heal or to work through. And I also believe that there are shadows or traumas or wounds that can only actually be healed when we are in that deep love with another being, human being. And also, I've learned through motherhood that there's certain wounds that I have only been able to access by actually stepping into motherhood, even though I've done a lot of work on ancestry and my own connection with my mother previously. So to think that a soulmate is this Prince Charming and we live happily ever after, no way. But when you look at challenges, difficulty, traumas, triggers, I think we all sometimes need to enter a space where we kind of lose our minds, right? Like that's what trauma does. We are unable to navigate it in the sober way we're able to navigate life in a normal sense. And I would say that with a soulmate, there's that patience and that understanding of like, okay, you need to lose your mind. Okay, it's it's unfortunate, but you have to fall into this depression, or you have to go through this identity crisis, or there's just this understanding, patience, and compassion, while also being able to be that vulnerable in the same way. So it's like how to lead and how to be led, how to take space and hold space, how to be vulnerable and allow the other to fall apart. And that level of commitment is something that, you know, recently I've been relating to more and more as, you know, the cycles of nature or the cycles of seasons, or something that requires us to understand their cycles that go up and down, and we need to be patient, kind of like being pregnant and then the birth and then watching the child grow, that I do unfortunately feel has been lost in some way. Like, um with the internet, with quick click and everything is available type of information, accessibility, shop and click and buy and it's there the next day, that kind of quick fast everything, I see it reflected in relationships where struggles or traumas or the patience that it requires is not always there, and it's easier to step out of it and then take care of the integration by yourself, which again I would say is part of the archetype of the strong independent woman. um but to answer your question, I suppose a soulmate would be the one that does have that patience, and where that patience is felt mutually.
You mentioned
Yeah.
flame, and what would you say the difference between a twin flame and a soulmate is? It's not quite the same thing. I mean, my understanding is that a twin flame is someone you meet in all lifetimes, and they're teaching you a lesson to kind of get you ready for the soulmate. Would you say that was true? Is
Oh,
that
that's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah. I
not as profound? I
So
mean,
in my course of Dare to Love, yeah, I have one chapter that is dedicated specifically to ex-partners, because very often it's those experiences that create certain patterns and blockages and ways of sabotaging your path to love, or, you know, feeling like you need to protect or whatever. And there's one, let's say, sub module connected to that module that is dedicated specifically to karmic connections. And when I hear you with your reference to twin flame, I would say like, yeah, it's a karmic connection. I've actually like kind of removed myself from that term ages ago, but it's a tricky energy. Karmic connection, past life recognition. They're, I guess, really sticky connection. I mean, I've had a couple, and one of them was definitely very impactful, even though we were never together. So it's the kind of connection that there's an instant recognition, there's an instant familiarity. Very often the love can unfold very quickly, because, I mean, if you do believe in reincarnation and having met in various lifetimes, which I do believe, then if you have that meeting with a twin flame, it means it comes with the old love, let's say. So love that is lifetimes old, and therefore it's deep love, it's profound love, it's very often a type of love that someone may have never felt in this life. And that's why it's so intriguing to like dive into it. It's magnetic, it's like it pulls you in very deep, very quickly, very intensely. However, if it's a twin flame, and if you have lived past lives, it often also comes with a load of baggage, right? Like unresolved karma. And I see these karmic connections as two ways. It can either be a karmic connection that, yeah, you were together in a past life and you didn't resolve whatever you needed to resolve, and now you're being offered a second chance. Or it could be a karmic connection in the sense that you've never met in a past life, but somehow his trigger triggers your trigger, and somehow the wounds that you're meant to resolve match, and therefore you are magnetized towards each other to see whether you can resolve it together, even though there's no history between you. There's like that karmic unfolding, and it's really interesting because I do see a lot of potentiality in these kind of connections. It's like, wow, if you were to work it out with that person, it's like being able to make a quantum leap, right in your evolution. But at the same time, it requires two people to say yes. And so far, I've not experienced that, and I've never seen that around me. I've actually only seen people needing to go through very deep initiations that were very intense and very difficult to resolve and to recover from.
So, what about
What,
going back to the soulmate? Do you think it's an instant connection, or is it something that can develop over time? Would you say you recognize that connection immediately, or does it just vary according to the circumstance?
I think it can go both ways, right? Because if I look at Rowan and I, we met 4 years before we actually got together. And when we met, we were both in a relationship, which is why there was no possibility to even explore. And my client at the time was his friend, and she's the one who said, "Oh, you guys should connect professionally."
Mm.
So we recorded a YouTube video for his channel, and that was it basically. Like, I never got to know him. We stayed in contact, like I said, to help each other with various projects and promotions and this and that, because it was just like very complimentary. And yet I do believe that it was already decided. Um, yeah, here in the Andes in Peru, I've in the past I've created all kinds of retreats where I would interweave the shamanic tradition from the Andes connected with the tantric background that I have from the time that I used to live in India. And I would include, different medicine people, let's say. I never worked with plant medicine in my retreats. It was more like a sweat lodge, working with plants with the connection to the mountain spirits here, and just the Andean way of shamanism, just shamanic connection. And there's one medicine woman that I've worked with over the years, who I very much honor for just who she is. Like, she comes from a lineage of curanderos. She learned her modalities from very young onwards. Like, I guess in that tradition, it's more emphasized for the child to learn these healing modalities, or learn how to keep to read the coca leaves, for example, or do a despacho offering instead of going to regular school. So it's like ingrained, and generation upon generation, right? So it's also that support of the ancestry. um so anyway, in my retreat, she would often do an offering and also offer a coca leaf reading to my participants. And a coca leaf reading is, I suppose, similar to either a coffee reading or tea leaf reading, or, I mean, there's all kinds of variations, right, in different cultures. And the coca leaf here is very sacred. And her channel is very clear and direct. Like, she'll never make up stories. She'll just give you, like, okay, this, and this.
Mm.
And in the beginning, it was like difficult for me to understand her ways of sharing that kind of profound information. But I remember very specifically there was one retreat where she said, "Oh yeah, you've already met your husband. You've already met your soulmate, the father of your children. But I see you need to go through a couple more relationships in order to get there." And at the time, I was really frustrated that I had received that information. It's like, oh,
Who is
fuck.
he?
Like,
Like thinking, who is he?
well, that
Going through your
too, but
concept.
also like
Mhm.
it means I
Mhm.
need to fall in love and break my heart and fall in love and break my heart, right? Which is what people like. I mean, I can speak for myself. Like, I was done. I was like fed up with needing to learn from love. And I felt like I had reached the point where I just didn't want to waste my time, even though nothing is ever wasted. Of course, I appreciate every love I had, but I also knew like I was ready to like really, really, really go deep. But I'd forgotten about it at some point. And when Ruwan and I got together, I got reminded of it. Somehow it like came up in me, like, boom, recognizing like, oh yeah, he had already been in my life. And like you say, no, I was thinking like, who's this person and who have I been attracted to? And maybe there's someone I let go of who I could have a second chance with. But in this sense, when I look at his journey, what happened in those 4 years up until the point that we got together, as well as my own journey, it did feel like, okay, we needed some solo independent exploration and understanding and integration to reach, let's say, a level of maturity that says, I'm really ready to do this. Um, and I mean, the fact that we reconnected during the pandemic, during world lockdown, it's almost like in the moment of impossibility, it became possible. So in that sense, I would say, yeah, I want to help people trust in the impossible love,
That's amazing.
especially if they have had I don't know, all kinds of weird encounters through Tinder or whatever. I think that that can often cause people to stop believing in love because there's, you know, there's all these like basically men that they don't really want to date, or men that are not really up to the emotional depth that the woman is looking for, or to start a family, for example, or be ready for that level of initiation. And slowly over time, especially through those kind of encounters, I've seen a lot of women shut down, right? Like shut down the heart, or come up with narratives of why it's okay that love is not at the priority right now, or it just seems impossible because there's absolutely no men in their surroundings that seem even close to what it is that they desire. And when, you know, going back to your question, I would say, like, yeah, the soulmate is there for sure. I believe everyone has one. And I believe
Just
that it
one
is
or
through,
several? Do you think
I
there's
believe in one, but
okay? That's interesting.
I am I'm very open to people disagreeing.
Okay, okay.
I
Okay.
suppose I'm just speaking from my own experience. Yeah.
From my experience, or from I did this book, you know, Calling in the One. Do you know this book? It's a really nice book. It's about how to attract your person.
Who's the writer?
What's her name? Catherine something. Where is it? I've got it on my.
Oh, because I make meditations for Mind Valley, and I think she has a
She has a
meditation.
talk on there. I mean, she's
Oh
amazing. Her
yeah,
story is amazing. And the calling in the one, and basically it's a 49-day course, seven weeks, and you're not supposed to date during that time. And you read about 3 pages a day, and then you do a little exercise. And I did it just 2 years ago. I just come out of another relationship, and even though that relationship was kind of a twin flame thing, but I know he wasn't the guy. But I still felt like I was craving something more. And I did this exercise, like why I'm still single, to try and take responsibility of my situation. And I think one of the reasons I put was I don't have any good role models around me. I think that's a really big thing, because when you see all these couples who are, I mean, just my friend said to me the other day, I'd rather be single than in an average relationship. You know, and you see these people who have just lost the spark. They're just kind of going through the motions of life, and it just seems so uninspiring. So when you see that around you and you see lots of people like that, then you just think, wow, I'm so lucky actually, you know, to be single.
yeah,
So that's a big block for many people.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
It's really good that you point that out. Um, yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one of the things. It's one of the reasons I would say that why I share so much of my personal story on my podcast, for example, or why I try to, you know, weave it in into interviews like this, or on my Instagram page, like all these details of just like the reminder of like it does exist, and
Mm.
not to like, you know, I'm the only one, because just to go back to my own journey, there was one couple I had met once upon a time. I didn't even know them that well, but we had met in Barcelona, actually, where
Oh,
you
well.
are. And they are musicians, beautiful couple, and they touched me both with just the way that they were together, and also the way that they both interacted with me in just their sovereignty, I suppose. That gave me this reflection, and you know, I followed them. We haven't actually met physically since then, but we're still in contact. And I guess I held on to that reference.
Mm.
And I think that if we all take the time to look for a reference that feels authentic to us, we will find that that is there. And it
Mm.
just comes down to shifting the perception. Because, like you say, these days it's so easy to look around and see how fucked up, or how there's a lack of commitment, especially, right? Like, oh, things get hard, I'll look for something else. Oh, he's not perfect, I'll look for something else. Oh, I don't feel safe. Instead of working with like, where's that actually coming from? Let's walk away. I mean, that was one of the patterns I had. It was very easy for me to walk away. And I would say maybe in some way I chose partners that I could walk away from. And
Mm.
it's interesting, right? And that's why I speak about this initiation when you do find your soulmate. And I do believe that there's some level within our subconscious that knows the ego is going to get destroyed once
Mm.
you dare to love, because it's like, yeah, some construct of what feels safe when you're independent, or what feels, I guess it's easier to manage life, right? Whereas when you manage life together, I mean, right now I'm learning how to manage life as being three people, and we want to have another child. And especially as a woman, it's like you're so interconnected, not just with your partner, but especially with your child. and it's I feel like I'm three people, and it does get overwhelming. And but to be able to navigate it, I do believe like that's the key power of true femininity. And it's difficult, right? Like to be in the masculine, to organize, to go through processes, to decide when to do what and how, in some way is easier. But once we do shift into like what I believe is the nature of the woman, not to say that I've canceled out all of my masculine attributes, because I would consider myself to be primarily masculine, but it's such a, I don't know how to put it. It's almost like I have more energy when I am in my feminine, and I just let my man take the lead. Like right now, for example, he had to go to Mexico where we have our home. It's a long story. Anyway, I stayed behind in Peru because this used to be my home and I just wasn't ready to leave. He had to work. And just not having him here, it's like, oh, I lean on him so much for like the little decision making. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like given so much space in my mind and my brain to not even need to connect to time or I mean, these are like small details, but when you do become that union, it's like you move together. And in order to understand how to build that foundation that you can healthily do that, egos need to be crushed for both, right? So narrative, stories, patterns, I think they all play into sometimes preventing us, or us ourselves on some level of consciousness, preventing us to get where we truly want to be.
Okay, so
I
let's
think I diverted a bit from
yeah,
what you were saying. Sorry about that.
that's really great. So let's forget Tinder and go to Tantra. How can a single person use tantric methods to attract a soulmate? That's what your key teaching, isn't it, in your course, Dare to Love? Is that
Mm-hmm.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Anything you can share
Yeah.
with us?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I do want to mention that, for example, orgasmic magnetism, if the ground hasn't cleared, it's kind of like having a garden, right? Like if you don't pull out the weeds,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't prepare the earth, then you can't plant the seeds and expect them to flourish. So
So
that,
working on yourself.
clear. Yeah, exactly. And, in Dare to Love, the first 3 weeks are very much dedicated to pulling out the weeds. We go very deep into ancestry, which in any shamanic tradition, that's the first thing they would look at. Is there anything that is passed on through the lineage? Because, I mean, we are living in a time where we have the privilege, right, to reach out to God knows how many therapists or professionals or plant medicines, or like we have basically a candy shop to pick from to do our inner work. And that's really beautiful, but our ancestors often didn't. Or my grandparents, for example, were born right before the Second World War, and how that impacted them. And after the war, there was no space really for integration. People didn't really want to talk about it anymore. They just wanted to keep going, and to just consider that, like things that I had to resolve for them, because in a way these echoes are passed on when traumas are unresolved. And that's just one example. But when it comes to love, it's the same thing, right? Like that kind of exploration or integration, unless you're from you're deeply connected to some kind of ancient lineage, I would say that was probably not present in any family, not in that way that is really needed. So those kind of patterns, I would say, like have to be recognized, removed, and shamanic rituals can very much help in that sense. And of course, ex partnerships and other shadows. And then once the ground is cleared, to integrate tantric practices, I feel is the absolute most powerful way to enhance the expansion of the heart and enhance the connection to that new vision. And it's not even a new vision, right? Because I think that all of us recognize, like, what is that intimate deep desire of what you wish to experience with your life partner, with your soulmate, or however you want to call it. um I do believe that that's innate, like it's a primal desire to want to just share life with your mate.
Mm-hmm.
And so to use sexual life force energy, as you know very well, is just the absolute most divine, godly, powerful energy that we have. And I see it as an infinite energy. So regardless of how much work you've already done with your sexual energy or the connection that you have with it, it can continue to grow almost as, a relationship that you have with yourself. And even like the expansion of that energy, or what you're able to achieve within the orgasmic space, can continue to grow and grow and grow, even if you do the same very basic tantric practices over and over again. And so just entering that space with that attitude of like, almost like I know nothing, you know? Like me, for example, I've been on the tantric path for more than 10 years, and it's amazing how, if I allow myself to just be in this curious open space of like, okay, show me what's there, how it can open up to new realms, new layers. And the key element in that exploration has to be intention. So I suppose one very simple practice would be to, yeah, direct that energy towards your goal.
We're
Now,
talking
I do want to
sex
say that,
transmutation or sex magic, something like that, both practices.
yeah, I would say both practices. I mean, I personally refer to sex magic mostly within couple.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, or sexual transmutation. But it's almost like making love with the universe.
Oh yeah, okay.
So if I don't know what you want to call it, if you want to call it the universe, the source, the godly, the divine, whatever you connect to, there's two ways of working with your sexual energy in that sense. You have the penetrative force, whether you're a man or a woman, which is basically, I have my goal and
Mhm.
here's my orgasm, and I'm going to shoot it into the heart of that, what it is that I wish to manifest. And I would say what I've seen online or what I've read around, that is the main thing that is spoken about when talking about using orgasmic life force energy for a manifestation. But then looking at femininity and looking at like how we are designed as women, we receive. And in my course, this is actually the thing I put most emphasis on, specifically because I do like working with strong, independent women. And it's a very different kind of power, right? To have so much trust that you open in a way that you know you're going to receive exactly that which is meant for you. And it may not be exactly the vision that you have. It may not have nothing to do with that list that you created, but it's simply that space of like, how can I be in that ultimate state of receptivity?
Mhm.
And as you probably know, and many of the listeners who are very connected to their sexuality, as a woman, the more open you are, the more you trust your partner, the more pleasure you receive. And the more, you know, we are in that space of absolutely allowing ourselves to melt. So
Mhm.
to go back to your question, when doing these kind of practices, I often encourage women to like avoid the labia, avoid the clitoris and the yoni completely in the beginning, to just emphasize on like, okay, how can I melt more? What is it that I need? You know, what other aspects of my body allow me to enter that orgasmic state without needing to have an orgasm, or without needing to like take it further, because that helps open, soften, relax. And I would say a woman needs to be in that space before touching her genitals and really aiming for that orgasm. And then of course, I don't know, I'm sure you've had a podcast episode on, you know, building up the orgasmic energy life force before having an orgasm, and how that also accelerates the power that energy can have. So to like look for the edge and then relax again, melt
Oh yeah,
open,
yeah.
and look for the edge and relax again, open. And then finally, when the orgasm comes, to ensure that the body is absolutely relaxed and focus on receiving the orgasm, as opposed to shooting it with almost like a penetrative force. And that state of relaxation requires practice. And the manifestation that is able to be experienced, or how do I say it? Like what you can manifest from that space, uh, it's almost like you have to know what it is that you want and be able to let it go. And by
Yeah, yeah.
practicing this, you're just practicing what it means to receive and trust to be open.
Yeah.
And what happens there, but it's like, yeah, we can talk about it,
Mhm.
but I do see like, yeah, for as women, whether you're, you know, whether you relate to being strong, independent woman or not, just living in the world that we live in now, I would say that every woman can spend some time just practicing that aspect of femininity, right? Like the pleasurable aspect of being open and receive the support that we essentially long for to receive from our men.
Definitely, because I've been practicing sex magic for 5 years, And
Mm.
my practice has evolved so much in relation to what I've been aiming for, my techniques, the books I've read. But more recently, I have a magical diary, so I always write down, the moon phase, the menstrual phase, and tarot
Mm.
card I pulled in the morning, and plus the
Wow.
intention. And the intention is sometimes, just a couple of words, something I'm aiming for, or it could be an affirmation I'm working with. But more recently, I've worked with affirmations such as I am ready to receive my gifts, or I'm open to or I am guided, the more kind of receptive, or what is mine will come to me, things like that are not non-specific. So I know exactly what you mean about that. Because I mean, when I first started it was because of financial need and more professional goals, like really in the masculine and really shooting out and going for certain specific goals. And then it started working just within a couple of months. It was amazing. So I really credit
Wow.
this magic for my current life because it's changed a lot in the last 5 years. I mean, 5 years ago, I had no pillows. I was living in a tiny apartment with no sofa. I was cold, and now I'm just living
Wow.
in a much nicer state. I paid off all my debt. So I kind of was very focused on financial, professional goals at the beginning. And
Incredible.
now I'm more focused on getting that balance in my life in other areas. And also read this book called Letting Go, the Pathway of Surrender. So that kind of got me into another space of, manifestation, because it's not just about, I think there's three parts of that. There's the mindset, there's the action, and then there's also the surrender of not being attached, detachment, so that's
Mm.
something I'm kind of working on. But I think I do like to kind of work with those affirmations that I'm guided, or what's mine will come to me, and then just trust. It's a kind of beautiful space to be in. Well, I did have one orgasm about a month ago with something like that, something like what's mine will come to me. I just started crying for no reason. I never really have those experiences in a solo space. Sometimes I've cried with an orgasm when I've been sharing the experience, but as a
Mm-hmm.
solo practice. So I practice actually sex magic as a solo thing. Not I'm
Mm.
completely opposite to what you're doing, but I'm really intrigued about learning more techniques as a to share. So it's
Well,
really.
I think what you share is
Mm,
really beautiful, and I hope that listeners can take from that, because
mm,
there's a reason why a lot of women have to step into that independence, right? And
mm,
and create that freedom, like you say, and financial independence and all of this, and express from our purpose, which you're evidently living. And
mm,
that in itself brings such a satisfaction. And then to, from that space, create the space for the femininity to also thrive. I can clearly see, like, wow, you're doing it with so much sensitivity and awareness. And yeah, it's really beautiful how you're working with that, because it's easy to get stuck, I suppose, in the comfortable. Like, oh
mm,
yeah, you know how to shoot out into the
mm.
universe and manifest, but to always humble yourself and open space for the new, no, like, and to trust, like you say, that what is meant for you will come. Yeah, sounds really powerful.
Yeah, it's really cool having a diary because you can look back and like, done, 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 got it. You see how fast
Wow.
what's working, especially in correlation with the moon phase. Like, for example, when it's waxing, things you want
Yeah.
more of; when it's waning, things you want less of. So I kind of work
Cool.
with that as well. Yeah, and also the menstrual. I work with sigils sometimes. That sigils is really cool technique, making these symbols. So when you make them, then you kind of forget about them and then just choose one. You've got no idea what it is, and you just kind of send in the energy that way, and you're kind of bypassing your conscious
Yeah,
mind.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's really, really
The one that tells all the stories. Yeah.
yeah, and all that's blocking you yourself. So I think everyone needs to move out of their own way and just get to the gifts because we're all stopping ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because even what you said of the example of the book that you read once upon a time, I do the same. Whenever people work with me, it's like, yeah, no dating, no dating apps. I want people to delete it, because I trust so much in this, like, old school of, like, you send out a vibration. And for sure, there's stories of people who did meet their partner on a dating app.
Mm-hmm.
But if somehow it hasn't worked out and is actually contributing to the sense of discouragement as opposed to encouragement, it's like, okay, let's cold turkey, get rid of everything. And conscious celibacy is one of the practices that I also integrate. And what I mean by that is kind of like what you said, no, like, you stop dating, but as opposed to celibacy, where there's an absence of interaction with anything sexual, it's actually using the sexual energy consciously. So kind of like what you were doing, and what I was just sharing about integrating a tantric practice. And it all kind of leads up to this point, what I said earlier, like knowing what it is that you want and being able to let it all go. And that is the purest vibration of receptivity. So just to give an example from my own life, I mean, like I said, I reconnected with Ruwan during the pandemic, and this was like August, end of August. So it had already been more than half a year of lockdown. I was here in Peru. It was really quite extreme. There was military on the streets. Our curfew was at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. There were certain days we weren't allowed to even go to the market. It was in a way very extreme, but on the other hand, it allowed for a particular intimacy to occur, like these
online
gatherings.
or even
Well, no,
online.
here. Yeah,
Okay.
here. Like the gatherings that we organized that were, quote unquote illegal. And it really brought us together, even though the community is already quite tight. And I told myself, I know I'm not going to find my partner here, but let's have fun. Like I was really thriving at that point in my life, business wise, everything, health. I was just like fully shining. And I said to myself, let's have a lover. So I invited a lover into my life. We had a great sexual connection. It was fun. We made some trips, but there wasn't that understand. Like I could just feel like with him, I can't share my 100% emotional experience. I so I held that back because I didn't want to, because I knew he couldn't hold that space. I guess he was lacking a little bit of that maturity that I wanted. And it's I guess it reflected to me like this difficulty, right, of like, okay, sometimes it's fun to have a really great sexual connection with someone who you can laugh with and go on adventures with, but a part of me just was, it's like I couldn't 100% be myself. So when he left the country, it was a little bit of a relief, where I felt like, I like it, we're still in contact. He's in a way a good friend, and I really wish him the best. I think he's an incredible person. But when he left, I was also relieved. Like I knew what I wanted, and I just didn't want to waste my time in that way anymore. And he actually helped me reach that point of like, you know what? I'm not even going to call in a lover. And up until that point, I hadn't had a lover just for the sake of having a lover for years. I mean, I'd had, attempts to relationships that failed. So not to say that everyone who ended up on my path ended up being long-term relationship, but I was just serious. Like I wanted something real. And with him, it was like really the focus on fun, but I couldn't be 100% myself. And then he left, and I basically said to myself, you know what? I can use my sexual life force energy and charge anything in my life. And this pandemic is going to last, I don't know how long. So I'm okay with that. I'll just be consciously celibate, do my tantric practices, allow my business to thrive. And I have zero complaints about the rest of my life, like business, friendship, sense of home, belonging. I was like, okay, forget about it. I'm going to even stop praying for, this beloved and invite him into my life. And so in that moment, I actually reached the point of being able to let go of my desire, if that makes sense. Because like I figured I've been
Attachment.
praying for this, so I don't need to repeat my prayer because the universe knows. I could just let go. And I think it was 2 days later that Ruwan invited me as a guest onto his podcast. And that is basically the thing that allowed the ball to get rolling. Because in
Wow.
that podcast was the first time I openly kind of flirted with him. It was actually about conscious celibacy and how to use these practices to release patterns of the past and relationships of the past and so on. And so it intrigued me in that interview, like what his patterns had been. And it was clear that he was at a stage in his life where he was also ready. When the interview was done, I suggested for us to do one-on-one sessions with each other. So me for him and him for me. And I think it was like 2 sessions in where he broke the ice, and he was like, he basically admitted he'd always been attracted to me and couldn't stop thinking about me and wanted to really explore whether this was something worth exploring. And I felt exactly the same way about him. But yeah, anyway, to go back to that point, it's like how to get in that space of like knowing exactly what you want and being able to let it go. Like it's something that you cannot fake. It's like an orgasm you cannot fake. And and how to get into that space is tricky. It's almost like so easy that it's difficult. And I suppose this is kind of what I love bringing people to. Like, what is that journey about? It's not necessarily like, oh, here's the key to manifesting all your dreams, but really getting into that space that is absolute trust, right? It's like I'm no longer directing because the universe already knows what it is that I want, whether it's love or something else. And then to have that trust and to have that openness to receive. And yeah.
Definitely. Amazing. I could talk to you for hours. A couple of quick questions. What is the book that changed your life? Do you have it's super sunny here.
The book that changed my life. Wow, that's actually quite a hard question.
Anything you read in the pandemic that kind of impacted you? Anything about Tantra that's been a learning tool for you?
It's really interesting. The book that actually comes to me is a novel, and it's quite
Okay.
humorous and fantasy rich. It's called Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins.
Uh-huh.
So I particularly like this book because he's interwoven aspects of history, as well as ancient history of India. So I lived in India for 5 years. So anything that somehow has this like fusion of, or a hint of the magic of India always intrigues me a lot. But the story is basically as follows. There's a king who needs to run away because otherwise he would be killed. And he encounters his wife called Kudra, and she is a master in Kama Sutra. And they both go on this journey of what it takes to live forever. And this has actually been one of my obsessions in the past, of like being obsessed with health and longevity and like how to live in the best way possible for the longest, right? And I think that sexuality is a huge element of that. And so in this book, there are certain practices that they integrate to be able to live together for the longest. So it might be a very strange example, because all the other books of Tantra, like, yeah, there's a few that I can think of, but I wouldn't say that they impacted me the most. Especially when it comes to like sexuality, is actually certain partners that I had or certain experiences that I had that allowed me to really integrate certain wisdom. And so, for example, when I look at like the way I've constructed the course that I made or the way that I share my wisdom, I am the type of person, like, sure, I'll dive into deep understanding through books, but I would never say it is mine unless I have an experience. So I always want whatever I share to be fueled through that. But this book, I suppose, in a way, because there is a hint of magic of them living for hundreds of years and moving through the challenges of that, and also the togetherness, right? Like how to overcome that together and have that, I suppose, passion that unites them, that obsession almost. Like, and I think that that is something that in the partnership is essential. So of course, me and my partner, we have the work that is very integrated. We're about to teach our first retreat together for couples, like how to accentuate that polarity within a couple more. Like we're going to do that in New York. Anyway, none of this is online yet, so I'm sharing this a bit premature. But we have that passion. And of course, we have a daughter and we want to grow our family. And so that is what unites us. And that is what gives us the strength to keep moving forward. But in this book of Tom Robbins, it's like it's their obsession of like understanding love, longevity, or immortality. And the potion that they create or how to recreate it, and the gods that enter the story and present their wisdom. So there's that connection to the earthly and the physical, as well as like the magical and the spiritual, and that unity, like how to do this together, that mission.
Mm.
And so for couples who don't want a family, I do always see that, yeah, if there's a lack of that thing that you nourish together, it's not easy to nourish the relationship. And so to have that, so in a way, I don't know if it changed my life, but it's a book I've read multiple times over the last 10 years. I think 3 times maybe, because it's just very written in a very eloquent way. Like I love his play with words and language, and it's almost poetic. And then there's history and fantasy and love, and
Wow, great ingredients.
good
Oh my gosh.
ingredients.
So what about do you have a phrase or affirmation or quote that you live by?
Mm. Well, the one that jumps into my head right now is everything can change in a single moment.
Oh, nice.
It it helped me a lot in difficult times in the past. The recognition that I've had a lot of experiences where, for example, I'd be stuck in a depression, for example, or not knowing which way to go. And often all it takes is, I mean, you're into books, so often what it takes is to read that one phrase that catches you, or that one movie that you see randomly, or meeting a stranger and that person sharing something that somehow shifts your perspective, or making a new friend, or it's like in a single moment everything can change. And yeah, it's helped me a lot. It's helped me a lot throughout
That's
my
very
life.
empowering.
what
So
what's yours?
so many because I actually didn't because I've been a writer for so many years. I used to write for El País. I've published 3 books here in Spain. I didn't want to be influenced by other books, so I didn't read for so long. And then in the pandemic, I read 30 books. I think the book that really changed me was Think and Grow Rich because I was really focused on money, and I read.
My partner reads that a lot.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
it's amazing! I've just done the workbook. I highly recommend this. Oops. Sorry for the. I mean, I've just done the workbook with a friend. You know the workbook?
No, but
It's
it's like it's always on his nightstand, this book.
I recommend this workbook because it's actually there's exercises based on each chapter. So I met with a friend every Friday at 4 o'clock, and we do a chapter a week. And I'm telling you, my life has just changed like in these last 12 weeks that we've been doing it. And it's really
Wow.
nice to bounce off these ideas from someone else, to kind of share, because he talks about, when two minds come together, it creates a third entity. And I really believe in teamwork, and also with
Yeah.
my friend, we're doing it and we're kind of seeing each other's situation from the outside so we can really help
Yeah.
each other. Because I mean, reading a book is not good enough. You have to, it's how you apply it. So Think and Grow Rich really blew my mind because I've been a sexual wellness content
So
creator since 2009. And when I discovered sex transmutation, it was like, wow, it was 5 years ago. And I thought I knew a lot about sexuality because I've been focused on pleasure and overcoming taboo, but I didn't realize there's a whole new realm of power and healing and manifestation. So it was just so incredible for me because I was in a situation where I was struggling. I was, I had no pillow and my neck was sore. I mean, I had a really bad sofa. I had all these sex toys and I was living in this apartment by the sea. I was like, how am I going to afford this? So then I discovered Think and Grow Rich and sex transmutation. Then I had 62 orgasms in March 2018, really focused on professional goals. And then in the June that year, I went vegan, and I kind of for spiritual reasons. And then I started manifesting, boom, boom, boom. And then it's just been ever since then. I've just been strengthening my magic practice, and it's just been I don't to the point where I don't really recognize my life now. It's very, very different. And that is the book that's really opened. And I thought, if that book has changed so much for me, how many other books are there? So I got really into
mm,
spirituality and personal development, sacred sexuality books. I have like a lot of big book shelf here, and yeah, I'm just always reading. I just find it fascinating. It's another one I love. Adventures in Sex Magic. This is another.
mm,
So I have a lot of books about sex magic as well. So I'm just really interested in and one book I really love is Sexual Energy and Yoga, which is an amazing
mm.
book. So yeah, I'm always hungry to learn more, and I just find it's interesting how to apply the sexual energy to other areas of life that go beyond pleasure and intimacy. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, just listening to you now, I'm like, oh yeah, now I see why it was so difficult for me to answer the question, because I think for me, it's been like the healing, the hearing of the call to
Mm.
go to a certain place that has like changed drastically aspects of my life. And so I've traveled a lot. I mean, I hope to finally ground, that's
Mhm.
for sure. But like my 5 years in India were exactly that, like that, what you say, you know, like encountering that master that shares tantra from a very different perspective than this other master. And I suppose the way that you sharing it regarding books is exactly that, right? It's like this perspective that highlights something that you're already integrating, and then you somehow fuse it into your own. I mean, listening to you, I'm like, wow, if you want and if you have the time, I would love to interview you, because
Oh,
I wish I got to know more about you in this chat as well.
oh, fantastic. That'd be a pleasure.
Yeah, it's
What's the name of your podcast? What's the name of your
Dare
podcast?
to Love.
Oh, amazing. I love it. Of course.
Yeah. No, but you seem just like really open, sensitive, humble, but also really intelligent and like full of wisdom,
Oh,
and
thank
just like
you.
a very beautiful expression of like femininity. And you're definitely like a strong, independent woman, but I can see this side of you that is truly like tapping into what is like the magic and the strength of being a woman. It's really beautiful to meet you.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. That means a lot to me because I mean, I've been working on this a lot. Just in the last couple of years, I went to this amazing retreat in the south of France in the area called Rennes-le-Château. It's the Mary Magdalene area. There's a
Mm.
lot of divine feminine energy there. And I went to see a psychic healer, and she really told me to kind of, really embrace the feminine more. So I'm getting into that, space of surrender, vulnerability, receptivity, which has been I've been the complete opposite most of my life,
Yeah.
being a
Well,
woman
it's
with balls.
noticeable.
No, now it's like to wear
Yeah.
dresses more, things like that, just trying to integrate more accessories. I used to kind of hate the kind of women who rattled because they were all, all these accessories, but now I'm becoming one. So,
Now I'm
but
becoming one.
it's amazing.
Yeah, I would love to chat more and hear more of your story. That would be so beautiful.
Fantastic. So where can people find you? Would you like to share your social media and website?
Yeah. Nalaya Chakana. But if that is somehow different, well, it's probably going to be in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Nalaya Chakana on Instagram, nalayachakana.com. But if that's too difficult to remember or you're in the car, idaretolove.com also redirects you to my website. And
Fantastic.
yeah, so I have Dare to Love coming up in July, and it's the only time I'm teaching this like after having our first child, and we're getting ready for the second pregnancy. So
Okay.
this is my window, and it's just been really beautiful to work on this, especially because I've taken a pause, let's say a distance from my work, and I feel like wow, the amount of stories, because it's really just a bundle of stories, no? Like when we truly share from authenticity, it's our experiences as well as everything I've learned from my clients over the years that allow for the foundation of these shamanic practices and tantric practices to make sense. And so the journey is 6 weeks. And the idea is that, like I said before, we come together as a group of women and weave our stories together and allow our journeys to be witnessed. Kind of what you said about that book, that workbook, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
when great minds come together, there's an alchemy that takes place
Absolutely.
that amplifies on the progress we're able to make or the healing that is able to take place. So that's really the essence. And yeah, I look forward to being connected to you and hopefully have you on my podcast. And thank you so much for the time and for this sharing.